James spent years saving lives, never imagining he'd be the one fighting for his own. After a tragic accident, he died, only to return with a terrifying warning. What he saw in heaven will change everything you think about faith, time, and eternity. Don't wait until it's too late. Watch this now. For as long as I can remember, I have dedicated my life to saving others. Being a paramedic wasn't just a job, it was my calling. I had spent more than 20 years rushing into chaos, battling time to pull people back from the brink of death. I had seen people at their most vulnerable, hanging between life and the unknown, and I had done everything in my power to give them another chance. Some days were brutal. The long hours, the relentless adrenaline rush, the moments of uncertainty where I wasn't sure if the person in front of me would survive. It all took a toll. I had lost count of how many patients I had treated, how many hands I had held in their final moments, how many families I had comforted when their worst nightmare became reality. And no matter how many times I had faced it, death never got easier. It was always heavy. Yet, a question had always lingered in the back of my mind. Why did some people survive while others didn't? I had seen patients pull through against impossible odds, waking up from comas, surviving accidents that should have been fatal. And I had seen others, healthy, strong, seemingly invincible, slip away despite our best efforts. I had seen children take their last breaths, while the reckless drunk drivers who caused the crash walked away unscathed. I had seen the young die and the old live. And no matter how many times I witnessed it, I couldn't make sense of it. I believed in God. I always had. But I struggled to understand him. I never questioned that he was real, but I often wondered how he decided who lived and who died. Did he intervene? Did he step in at the last second for some, but not for others? Or was it all just random? I tried not to dwell on it too much. I told myself it wasn't for me to understand. My job was to fight for every life, to do everything I could in the moments that mattered, and to trust that whatever happened was beyond my control. But despite seeing death every day, I never once thought about my own mortality. I had always been the one saving lives, never the one fighting for my own, until one fateful night changed everything. It started like any other shift, just another night on duty. My partner, Mark, and I were stationed in our usual spot, sipping bad coffee and waiting for the next call. The radio crackled to life, and the dispatcher's voice came through. MVA, multiple vehicles, possible critical injuries. Respond code 3. Motor vehicle accident. It wasn't unusual. We had responded to hundreds, maybe thousands, over the years. I instinctively ran through the usual protocols in my head as we sped through the city, sirens wailing, lights flashing. It was just another call, another race against time. We were only a few blocks away when it happened. A blinding set of headlights appeared out of nowhere. I barely had time to register what was happening before the impact. The truck slammed into us from the side. The ambulance jerked violently, the sickening crunch of metal against metal filling my ears. Glass shattered, steel twisted, and for a moment, the world spun in slow motion. I felt my body being thrown forward, my seatbelt digging into my chest as the force of the crash sent us spiraling. The weightlessness lasted only a second before everything came crashing down. Pain, unbearable, all-consuming pain. The crushing pressure of twisted metal around me. The suffocating tightness in my chest. The sharp agony of something stabbing into my side. Every nerve in my body screamed, but the pain barely registered before the darkness took over. Everything went black. For the first time in my life, I was the one fighting for survival. And in that moment, I had no idea that my questions about life and death were about to be answered in a way I never could have imagined. The moment the impact happened, everything went dark. No sound, no sensation, just emptiness. Then, suddenly, I was awake. I opened my eyes, expecting pain, expecting the crushing weight of metal pressing against me. But there was nothing. No burning, no suffocation, no agony. Just stillness. I felt lighter, almost weightless, as if my body had been stripped away. For a split second, I thought I had survived the crash. Maybe I was in shock. Maybe the adrenaline was masking the pain. But then I looked down, and what I saw made my breath catch in my throat. I was staring at myself. There I was, trapped in the wreckage. My body twisted unnaturally in the front seat of the ambulance. My partner, Mark, was slumped over beside me, his arm hanging limp, a gash on his forehead bleeding onto his uniform. Outside, other first responders were rushing toward us. I saw paramedics, my own colleagues, scrambling to get me out. I saw a firefighter forcing open the driver's side door with a crowbar, his face tense with urgency. And then I saw something that sent a jolt through me. My body wasn't moving. I wasn't breathing. One of the paramedics pressed his fingers to my neck, searching for a pulse. He shook his head and started chest compressions. I should have felt fear. I should have panicked. But instead, I felt nothing but peace. A deep, overwhelming sense of calm washed over me, unlike anything I had ever known. The chaos unfolding below felt distant, almost unimportant. I knew what had happened. I was dead. And yet, for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. Time felt strange. I watched the scene below me, but it was as if everything was moving in slow motion. The flashing red and blue lights cast eerie shadows across the pavement. The wailing sirens, the frantic voices, they were muffled, like I was hearing them from underwater. I turned my head, expecting to see nothing but darkness around me. But then, there was light. At first, it was just a faint glow in the distance. Then, it grew brighter, spreading outward in a way that defied explanation. It wasn't just illumination, it was alive. The light wasn't harsh or blinding, but soft and inviting, radiating warmth in a way I had never felt before. It was pure, untouched by anything earthly. I felt it pulling me, not in a forceful way, but like a gentle invitation. It was calling to me. And then, I heard it. A melody, not like any music I had ever heard before. It wasn't coming from an instrument or a voice, but from the very essence of the light itself. It moved through me, resonating in my soul, filling me with something I couldn't quite name. It wasn't just a sound, it was a feeling. A love so deep and consuming that it made every worry, every burden I had ever carried disappear. The pull became stronger, and I felt myself drifting toward it, weightless, as if I was no longer bound by gravity, no longer a part of the world I had known. Then, I realized something that sent shivers through me. I was leaving. The realization should have terrified me, but it didn't. I felt no urge to fight it, no desperation to cling to the life I had left behind. I had spent years fearing death, questioning it, trying to understand it. But now, standing on the edge of something far greater than I had ever imagined, I understood. Death wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. I turned one last time, looking down at my body. They were still working on me, shouting orders, charging the defibrillator, pressing their hands against my chest in a desperate attempt to bring me back. But I knew they wouldn't. I wasn't there anymore, and I didn't want to be. I let go. The moment I stopped resisting, everything shifted. The light grew so bright that it consumed everything around me. I felt as if I was being lifted, carried by something unseen, something far greater than myself. I closed my eyes as the warmth surrounded me, filling every part of me with a peace so profound that it brought tears to my soul. I was free, free from pain, free from worry, free from everything that had ever weighed me down. Then, the light changed. It wasn't just a glow anymore. It was moving, shifting, taking form. The air around me seemed to hum with energy, and I felt a presence. One so powerful, so overwhelming, that I could barely breathe. I wasn't alone. Someone was stepping forward from the light. I couldn't see a face at first, just the outline of a figure surrounded by radiance. But I felt it. I knew it. Every fiber of my being recognized the presence before me, even though I had never seen it with my own eyes. It was him, Jesus. I didn't need an introduction. I didn't need to ask. The moment he stepped forward, I knew that I was standing before the one I had spent my whole life wondering about. The one I had prayed to, doubted, questioned. The one I had never fully understood, until now. And in that moment, every thought I had ever had about him, every image, every sermon, every belief I had carried was stripped away. Because he was real, more real than anything I had ever known. I wanted to fall to my knees, but I had no body to kneel with. Yet, Somehow he knew. His eyes met mine, and in that instant, I felt everything. I felt his love, so deep, so consuming that it took my breath away. I felt his understanding, like he had seen every moment of my life, every struggle, every doubt, and still, he stood there with open arms. I felt his power, so immense that it could have shattered me, yet so gentle that it felt like the safest place I had ever been. He didn't speak. He didn't need to, because the moment I looked into his eyes, I knew. I had been searching for answers my entire life. Searching for the reason why some people survived and others didn't, why death came for some but spared others. And now, I was finally about to understand. Jesus lifted his hand and extended it toward me. And as his fingers reached for mine, I realized this was just the beginning. The moment Jesus extended his hand toward me, everything around us shifted. The radiant light that had surrounded him seemed to pulse, alive and all-encompassing, but it did not blind me. Instead, it filled me with a warmth beyond anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't just heat, it was love. Not love as I had known it on earth. This love was different. It was complete, overwhelming, all-consuming. The weight of it brought me to my knees. I had no physical body here, and yet I felt the urge to bow, to fall before him, not out of fear, but out of absolute reverence. I had spent my life wondering about God, questioning why he allowed suffering, why he let some people live and others die. I had seen so many lives slip away in front of me, held the hands of the dying, whispered words of comfort to those who had no time left. Now, here I was, face to face with the one I had prayed to, doubted, longed for, yet never truly understood. And in that moment, I knew that he had seen every single moment of my life, every doubt, every act of kindness, every time I had struggled to believe, every time I had questioned if he was truly there. He had never abandoned me. I felt the weight of it in my soul. He had always been there. Then, he spoke, not with words as we know them, but with something deeper. His voice filled me, moved through me. It was more than sound. It was truth. "James, there is something you must see." As soon as he spoke, everything around us changed. I was no longer in the light. I was standing in the middle of my own life. Scenes flashed before me. My childhood, my first day as a paramedic, the adrenaline-fueled rescues, the nights when I collapsed into bed, exhausted but knowing I had made a difference. I saw myself holding a child in my arms, reassuring her as she bled out, telling her she would be okay even though I knew she wouldn't make it. I saw the moments of success, patients who had survived against all odds, families who had thanked me through their tears. And then, I saw the failures, the ones I couldn't save, the ones who died in my ambulance, the ones whose faces haunted me at night. For the first time, I saw myself the way Jesus saw me, not just my actions, but my heart. I saw the times I had been kind and the times I had been selfish, the moments of faith and the moments of doubt. And then, something deeper. I had spent years saving people physically, but never once had I thought about their souls. I had fought to keep their hearts beating, to give them another chance at life. But had I ever considered whether they were ready for eternity? I had never asked if they knew Jesus, never once told them that their time was running out. I fell to my knees again, overwhelmed by the realization. How many had I saved from death, only for them to continue living without ever knowing the truth? How many had I rescued, only to send them back into a life where they would never seek God? Jesus didn't condemn me. He didn't accuse me. He simply showed me. And his eyes were filled with so much sorrow, not just for me, for all of us. Then, the vision shifted again. I was no longer watching my own life. I was watching the world, but not as I had always seen it. I saw it through his eyes. At first, everything looked the same. Cities, homes, people going about their daily lives. But then, I noticed something. The distractions. People glued to their phones, scrolling endlessly. Men and women obsessed with money, status, power, living for things that would never last. Families sitting in the same room but not truly together, each lost in their own world of entertainment and social media. People running after success, chasing the next promotion, the next possession, the next temporary high. And worst of all, so many people were completely unaware of what was coming. They weren't thinking about eternity. They weren't thinking about their souls. They thought they had time, but they didn't. Then, I saw the churches. Some were massive, filled with people singing, lifting their hands, following traditions. Others were small, humble. But in many of them, I saw the same thing. Hearts that were distant, people going through the motions, prayers that were spoken out of habit, not hunger. I saw pastors who had once preached boldly but had softened their message to keep people comfortable. I saw congregations that wanted inspiration, not conviction. People wanted God's blessings, but not His lordship. I saw lukewarm believers, people who believed in God but didn't truly seek Him. They thought that showing up to church on Sundays was enough, that saying a quick prayer before bed was enough, that believing in Jesus without following Him was enough. Then, I heard His voice again, gentle, but filled with sorrow. They believe they have time, but they do not seek me. I broke. I wept, because I knew it was true. I had spent years thinking I understood life, thinking I was doing enough just by being a good person, by saving lives, by believing in God without ever truly surrendering to Him. I had assumed that one day I would be more devoted, that one day I would take my faith more seriously, that there would be more time. But I never made the choice, and neither did so many others. I turned to Jesus, my voice shaking. Lord, what can be done? His eyes met mine, filled with love but also urgency. They must turn back before it's too late. And in that moment, I understood. This wasn't just about me. This was about everyone. This was about the millions of people living their lives without realizing how close they were to eternity. And if I was given another chance, I could not stay silent. The vision around me shifted. The warmth of heaven faded, and suddenly, I was somewhere else, somewhere darker, heavier. It wasn't hell, not yet, but it was a place of waiting, a place of regret. I could hear voices. No, not just voices, cries. Desperate, hopeless. I turned to Jesus, my heart pounding. He didn't say a word, but I could feel His sorrow, like a weight pressing into my soul. Then, He lifted His hand, and the vision opened before me. The first thing I saw were souls. Countless souls, trapped in a place that felt so close to heaven, yet infinitely far away. They were reaching, stretching towards something unseen, as if they could almost touch it, but they never would. They were people who had died without truly knowing Jesus. Some had heard about Him but always said, "I'll turn to God later." Others had attended church, said their prayers, even called themselves Christians, but had never surrendered their lives. They had believed in religion, but never truly in Jesus. They wept, their voices echoing through the darkness. I thought I had more time. I was going to change, but I waited too long. Why didn't someone warn me? A deep sorrow pierced my chest. These weren't evil people. They weren't murderers or criminals. They were ordinary people. People who had been too busy, too distracted, too confident that they had time to find God later. But later never came. Jesus' voice broke the silence. It was filled with sadness, but also justice. They knew of me, but they did not seek me. They believed in tomorrow, but tomorrow was never promised. Tears burned in my eyes. I had been one of them. I had spent my whole life saving people physically, but I had never once thought about saving their souls. How many people had I revived in an ambulance, only for them to go on living the same way? Lost, distracted, without God? How many of them had died again, without ever hearing the truth? The vision shifted, and I saw churches. At first, they looked full. Hundreds of people sitting in pews, singing songs, bowing their heads in prayer. But as I looked closer, my stomach twisted. Many of them weren't truly worshiping. Some were on their phones, scrolling through social media. Others were thinking about work, money, relationships, sports, anything but God. Their lips moved in prayer, but their hearts were far away. And then I saw the pastors. Some were true shepherds, preaching the gospel boldly, calling people to repentance. But many were not. They were telling people what they wanted to hear, making them comfortable, never warning them about sin, about urgency, about eternity. They have traded truth for comfort, Jesus said, his voice sorrowful. They do not speak of repentance because they fear losing followers. But they have already lost what matters most. A cold chill ran through me. I had gone to church, I had believed in God, but had I ever truly followed him? Had I ever surrendered my life completely? Or had I just assumed I was safe because I knew his name? The vision changed again. Now, I saw people who had lived morally good lives. They had been kind, generous, loving. They had helped the poor, cared for their families, and treated people with respect. But they had never accepted Jesus. I saw them standing before a great chasm, a vast, uncrossable divide separating them from heaven. They looked confused, desperate. "Lord," one of them cried, "I was a good person. I helped others. I never hurt anyone." But a voice from the other side answered, not in anger, but in sorrow, "You did many good things, but you never knew me." A sob caught in my throat. These people had thought their goodness would save them. They had thought that being better than others was enough. But Jesus hadn't come to make good people better. He had come to save the lost. And they had never accepted him. No one had told them that being good wasn't enough. And now, they were separated from him forever. Jesus turned to me, his eyes filled with both sorrow and urgency. "Do you see now?" he asked. "Do you understand why I have brought you here?" I nodded, my entire being shaking. "Lord," I whispered, "what can I do?" His gaze held me in place, full of love and power. "You must go back." I froze. Go back? How could I? I didn't want to leave. This was where I wanted to stay. "James," he continued, "they must hear this message. They must know that time is running out. There is still hope, but they must choose me now. You must tell them." I looked at the souls below, at the people crying out in regret, at the churches full of distractions, at the pastors afraid to speak the truth. And I knew I couldn't stay. I had to return. I turned to Jesus, my heart breaking. "Lord, I will go." A smile broke across his face, not just of joy, but of relief, as if he had been waiting for me to understand. He reached out his hand, and as soon as I touched it, everything went black. The overwhelming peace of heaven surrounded me. Every fiber of my being longed to stay, to remain in the presence of Jesus. There was no pain, no sorrow, only love so pure and deep that it consumed me completely. For the first time in my existence, I felt whole. I looked at Jesus, my heart aching. "Lord, please let me stay." His eyes, filled with both love and sorrow, met mine. "Your time has not yet come," he said gently. "There is something I need you to do." A sudden weight pressed upon my soul, not a burden, but a purpose. I felt it before he even spoke the words. "You must go back, James. You must tell them what you have seen." My heart clenched. "Lord, who will listen? People won't believe me." Jesus placed a hand on my shoulder. The warmth of his touch filled me with indescribable peace. "Many will not believe. Some will mock you. Others will ignore you. But there are those who will hear, those whose hearts are ready." His voice was steady, filled with divine authority. "Your mission is not to convince. It is to speak." A vision unfolded before me. I saw people living their lives as if they had all the time in the world, chasing success, drowning in distractions, believing they could turn to God later. But then, I saw the moment death came unexpectedly. I saw regret written on their faces as they realized they had waited too long. "They believe they have time," Jesus said, "but time is never guaranteed." Tears filled my eyes. "What if I fail?" "You are not alone. I am with you always." His voice held a promise that settled deep into my spirit. "You must warn them before it is too late." I looked around at the beauty of heaven one last time. The love, the perfection, the overwhelming peace. It was everything I had ever longed for. Yet, I knew I could not stay. Jesus reached out and touched my forehead. His voice, full of power and love, echoed through me, "Go and tell them what you have seen." Everything around me faded. The light, the music, the presence of heaven. It all dissolved into darkness. I was falling, pulled away from eternity, back toward the world I had left behind. And then, suddenly, I gasped for air. A violent gasp tore through my chest as I was yanked back into my body. Pain flooded every nerve. My lungs burned as air filled them, and my heart pounded as if it had just been restarted. The bright light of heaven was gone, replaced by the harsh fluorescent glow of a hospital room. The sound of frantic voices surrounded me. "He's back," a nurse shouted, her eyes wide in shock. I could barely process what was happening. Machines beeped, monitors flashed, and hands gripped my wrists, checking for a pulse. "He had no heartbeat for over 7 minutes," a doctor murmured, staring at me like I was a ghost. "This is impossible." But I knew the truth. It wasn't impossible. It was Jesus. I had been sent back. Tears blurred my vision as I tried to speak. My throat was dry, my body weak, but my soul burned with an urgency I had never known before. "I saw him," I whispered. "I saw Jesus." My family crowded around the bed, their faces a mixture of relief and confusion. My wife clutched my hand, her eyes filled with tears. "James, you were gone. They said you weren't coming back." I shook my head. I wasn't supposed to, but he sent me back. The weight of the message pressed down on me. I had to tell them, everyone, what I had seen. I had to warn them. I spoke of the light, the overwhelming love, the vision of the world lost in distractions, the souls who had waited too long. I told them of Jesus' words, his sorrow, his plea for people to turn back before it was too late. Some sat in stunned silence, hanging onto every word. Others exchanged skeptical glances. A few dismissed it altogether. "It must have been a hallucination," a friend muttered. "Your brain was deprived of oxygen." But I knew better. I had stood before the King of Kings. I had seen eternity. Nothing could convince me otherwise. It didn't matter who believed me. My mission was clear. I had to tell them. From that day forward, I dedicated every moment to spreading the truth. I spoke in churches, hospitals, to strangers on the street. I told my story again and again, warning anyone who would listen. Heaven is real. Jesus is waiting. The biggest danger is assuming you have more time. Some listened. Some ignored me. Some mocked me. But I did not stop. I leave you with this. Are you truly living for God, or are you waiting for someday? Because someday is never guaranteed.